Today marks a decisive change in federal nutrition policy.
Oh, here we go.
The new guidelines recognize that whole, nutrient-dense food is the most effective path to better health.
I love that. Whole nutrient-dense food. Where have I seen that before? Oh, from the previous dietary guidelines. Customize and enjoy nutrient-dense food. And then look at all these whole vegetables and...
I'm Dr. Andrew Kudnick, a biomedical research scientist studying the impact of food and nutrition on health and performance. Dr. Jessica Nurek is a well-known scientific communicator and has also published a few scientific publications on topics like plant-based diets, but is really blasting these new guidelines around fruit, vegetable, grain recommendations, at least compared to prior dietary guidelines. Some of her comments are accurate, but she makes some major flaws in her criticism.
Protein was a quarter of the plate. Protein section, meats, poultry, eggs, seafood, nuts, seeds, and soy, all right there. Also, what do you mean you're ending the war on saturated fat?
Hold on, a quarter of the plate, but those prior protein recommendations are still well below the described level to be optimal for things like muscle mass and supporting better body composition. In fact, these new guidelines increased intake by 50 to 100%. So I don't think it's fair to criticize the protein recommendations entirely. But I do agree with this point that a 10% saturated fat intake seems odd if we are truly arguing we're entering the war on saturated fat.
So the obvious takeaway for someone looking at this is I should eat a lot of animal protein and fat. But your official recommendation, which is actually in line with current evidence, is to keep saturated fat under 10% of total calories, which is virtually impossible by including all of those animal products, and makes no sense.
So many have argued a cap on saturated fat should be removed altogether. Personally, I have no problem with Dr. Nurek's recommendation that people on high carbohydrate diets should consider limiting saturated fat intake, but I also highly questionable whether the science supports that same recommendation for all diet patterns, particularly low carbohydrate diets, which are recommended in the new dietary guidelines for the first time and often increase saturated fat intake.
Also, your actual guidelines say to consume a variety of protein sources from animals and plants, like beans and lentils and legumes and soy, but your consumer-facing website only shows animal protein.
That's not true. There is a consumer-facing website that actually shows fruits and vegetables and fish. Literally, it's in the banner video for the website.
Is that the Center for Science in the Public Interest, a science and health advocacy organization that's been doing this work for over 50 years, created uncompromised dietary guidelines based on the original scientific report that health professionals and people can use to guide their decisions.
I understand criticism of funding sources, but that isn't a rigorous point, at least in my opinion, and arguably is where her criticism has the biggest flaw. This is why everyone must be careful in criticizing funding sources. A funding source does not mean it is compromised, and if it did, the report Dr. Nurek is describing would be, by her own definition, compromised. Look, Dr. Nurek makes some very valid points, but maybe we should be more balanced in our discussion in these guidelines.